Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. In a time before COVID, one of the great places to visit on a Friday night in Manhattan was B'nai Jeshurun Synagogue, affectionately known as BJ. People would come from all over the world, and they could get anywhere between 200 and 1,200 worshipers. And you would come to a service that was filled with spirit and inspiration, music and song. And then at one point, in a way that everyone was excited for and anticipating, people would stand up and they would start dancing. The regulars knew exactly when this time would come. The clergy would stand and gather people together, and those who were coming for the first or second time would reluctantly join together, and the entire congregation would join in singing and dancing throughout the whole congregation. Excuse me. And it becomes this moment of celebration and happiness and joy. And most people who go to B'nai Jeshurun are captured by the music and the infectious nature that dancing offers. But the overwhelming majority of people who go on a regular basis, or who have gone there once or twice, or don't even live there and maybe just visited or heard about it, have no idea why that synagogue dances on Shabbat. And here is the reason. In the late 1980s, when Marshall T. Meyer, one of the founding rabbis of that synagogue of blessed memory, was presiding over services, it was a Friday night. And in those days, for Friday night, they maybe got anywhere between 40 and 80 people attending the service. Services were called for 6:15, and at 5:50, when the maintenance person arrived at the synagogue, they saw and realized something catastrophic. The ceiling in the synagogue had collapsed. And it collapsed over all of the pews. And they realized as soon as the rabbi got there, when they called the police and the fire department and everyone had come in, that if that ceiling had collapsed just a half an hour later, that it could have had a toll of taking all the lives, if not at least some of the lives, of those that were in that sanctuary. That night, because they couldn't enter into the synagogue, Rabbi Meyer got permission from the local police to have services right there on the sidewalk outside the shul. And people heard the news and they gathered around, and Rabbi Meyer said, all of you guys are crying, you're sad about the collapse of the roof, but thank God we weren't in there. If we were in there, we could have all been traumatized, hurt, maimed, even killed. So let's celebrate. We have what to be thankful for. And they started dancing on the streets. And then when they finally got back into the synagogue after the roof was repaired, in celebration, they kept dancing, realizing how blessed they were. And now, more than 25 years later, every week, in a pre-COVID time at least, with few exceptions, times of sadness and mourning, B'nai Jeshurun Synagogue became a place that when you came on Friday nights, you celebrated Shabbat with singing, but more importantly, with dancing. A ritual happened to mark a moment and to create a sense of joy from that time forward. A ritual happened to mark that moment, to commemorate the happenings, and to create joy forward. Hold that in your frontal lobe just for a moment. One of the most common questions I receive as a rabbi is the following. Rabbi, my loved one died on October 3rd, and it's almost the yard site a year later, and we have to have the unveiling. So I've got the cheesecloth. Are you available? I know the law says the unveiling has to be on a Sunday. And I always chuckle inside, because there is no such law. In fact, the unveiling is a fully Western custom. In Israel, there's no such thing as an unveiling. They mark the grave of a loved one in stone in Israel anywhere between after the Shiva, 7 days afterwards, sometimes 30 days afterwards. But what happened in America over the last 125 years is we marked graves with large granite stones. Now, we have a commandment that we have to mark the graves of our loved ones. But the way they look on stones and what kind of stones they are and what it says on there, no commandment whatsoever. And we started putting stones up that said, Schwartz family, beloved husband, father, so on and so forth, dates that they lived and died. And it took the craftspeople who made these stones anywhere from 6 to 9 to 12 months to make the stone, to pour a foundation in the ground, and to erect that stone at the final resting place of their loved one. At the same time, people were ritually saying Kaddish for their loved one for the entire year, for a father or a mother in most cases. And when you're done saying Kaddish, I can tell you from experience, it is the most anticlimactic moment in your life. For me, I worked hard not to miss a day of Kaddish for the entire year, both for my brother and for my father, where at least once a day I said the Kaddish prayer in a quorum of 10, known as a minyan. And I said it every day. It built my entire day of everything I did. And then all of a sudden, I get to the mincha prayer that day, I say the Kaddish, and then I get to the Ma'ariv prayer, and I don't. It's over. There is no ceremony. There is no ritual. It's just done. And you have this strange, almost this craving desire to continue to say Kaddish, to continue to do something to mark the moment. So what we did as a society, realizing that the conflation of when a stone usually came up was that we marked the end of Kaddish with an unveiling. But there is no law whatsoever anywhere in Judaism that we must unveil a stone. And definitely nowhere are we supposed to put cheesecloth on that stone or say Todah as we take it off. We're only told to mark the stone. And in Israel, it's done at 7 days or 30 days. Other places, it can be done at 2 months or even at 2 or 3 years. When my daughter was born, we didn't know if we were going to have a boy or a girl. We had intuitions, we had thoughts, but we were going to be one of those parents that weren't going to know. There were no reveals in those days. There were no balloons that pop with powder of a particular color. And we decided we would find out in the delivery room whether we were going to have a boy or a girl. And the only thing that stymied me in that process, me, an Ashkenazic alpha male who likes to plan and organize, was what will we do if there's a bris and I only have 8 days in which to prepare for it? Well, sure enough, we had a girl. And we decided, Dory and I, that for our baby girl, we were going to have a baby naming that would look very similar to the bris except for the actual ritual part of it, if you understand what I mean. And by that I meant that we did not give her her Hebrew name or her English name until the 8th day. We had a moment in shul with all of our friends and our family. She was welcomed in with kavaterin, with godparents who walked her in. We all said brucha haba'ah, just like we would to a young boy who comes in. Of course, there was no mohel and there was no circumcision, but there was the bestowing of a Hebrew name and a ritual that we had created, along with our dear friend, Rabbi Eric Solomon, to solemnize that moment and to make it meaningful for us. Now, in Judaism, dating back to the time of rabbinic texts, there is no ritual for a baby naming. We just gave a name to a baby girl. Why? Because sometimes, sadly, part of our tradition is a little patriarchal, and it doesn't always represent the modern realities and needs and desires of the society in which we live in. So what do we do when that happens? We create ritual. Ritual that adds significance and that adds meaning to our lives. In the parsha that Jake read from today, Parshat Tazria Mitzorah, we're told that when someone is afflicted with leprosy, they must be outcast from the community for a certain amount of time. They are told that they are ritually impure, they can't come in contact with others. The priest comes and checks them twice for the affliction. The person And then when they are deemed kosher to come back, no longer impure, no longer infectious, they don't just walk back. There is a ritual that has to occur, and that is they are told that they have to go to the mikveh, to the ritual bath, and immerse him or herself and come out, and then they can rejoin the community. So it wasn't just a moment of saying, hey, you're now clean, go on back, and then they enter into the field like a suspension that has been given to a player. But rather, they had to immerse in the mikveh as a ritualization to say, I'm prepared to come back to the community. Why the mikveh? Because the mikveh represents a moment of being reborn. All of us are born through water, and that is the amniotic fluid, the water sac that all of us have. And to represent that sense of reborn, the mikveh does that for all of us. When we become impure, before we get married, other times in our lives when we convert to Judaism, it is a time of rebirth. And that's what we do when someone comes in contact with tzara'at. We are reborn. All of these rituals, the ritual of dancing at B'nai Jeshurun, the ritual of an unveiling, the ritual of a baby naming, are all relatively modern phenomenon that have become canonized into who we are as part of the Jewish people, some particular to place and space, some particular to time, and some particular to a sense of history and meaning. And I have been scratching my head for the last handful of months, really since the idea that vaccines would become prevalent and accessible to the majority of our community, wondering how we are going to ritualize our reintegration back into society. For the last 2 Friday nights, we have been open here at the temple. If you're a member of our community, and that doesn't mean necessarily member of the temple, it just means you live in the community, and you have proof of vaccination, and you're over 18. If you're under 18, you can come in. Over 18 with proof of vaccination, or you register with your vaccination, you come back to the shul. In just over a month, May 23rd, on Monday, we're going to start opening up again for weekday minyan, Monday through Thursday night, Sunday mornings, Wednesday mornings. Weekday minyan is going to happen at 7 o'clock p.m. in person. And then on June 19th, Shabbat mornings, where people who used to come every single week have their regular spots, they're going to come back. And what are we going to do ritually to mark this time? To mark the deaths that have occurred, because as we sat here today on this Shabbat, we hit the toll of 3 million deaths in the world from coronavirus. Over 575,000 in this country alone. Too many from this synagogue. How are we going to mark that when we come back? How are we going to mark what the last year has been for grandparents who couldn't see grandchildren, who couldn't hold new grandchildren, who couldn't hug and kiss them? How are we going to mark time when we couldn't see parents or be with them at difficult times in their lives, or family members, or celebrate smachot in ways that we dreamt of but couldn't come to reality? How are we going to create a ritual that is meaningful to Judaism, but at the very same time recognizes the Gesher Tzar Ma'od, the incredibly narrow bridge that we have all traversed over these last 14 months to get us to this time today? Even here now, allowing up to 100 people in the sanctuary is a great, great moment and definitely represents progress. But it's not where we were, and it's not where we hope to be soon. So what are we going to do to make these two moments come together? I've had occasion where people have come to my office and said, Rabbi, I celebrate Shabbat. I light candles on Shabbat. On Rosh Hashanah, I dip apples and honey I don't eat on Yom Kippur, and I build a sukkah in my house. My father is Jewish, my mother is not Jewish, and there are some who say that according to halakha, according to Jewish law, that I'm not Jewish. But I feel Jewish, and I don't know what to do about it. Often I tell that person, I see you as a Jew. You see yourself as a Jew. You have aligned your faith with the Jewish people. To me, you're Jewish. However, There will be some who don't fully see yourself as Jewish, and you might at times question your engagement as a Jewish person. So I want to take you to the mikveh, to the ritual bath, where you will immerse, and it will quash any of that ambiguity from here forward. What about someone who says, I'm an American, I pay taxes, on the 4th of July, I eat hot dogs and apple pie, I would gladly fight for my country, but they don't have citizenship. It's a blending of not only what we feel, but also that oath that those immigrants, however they immigrated to this country, whether they were children and didn't know the difference, or whether they came over consciously as adults, when they raised their hand and swear to uphold that Constitution and follow those laws and receive that passport, that actualizes that moment. And in Judaism, there are times that require us to create ritual as well. And COVID is such a time. It's a time for us to create a ritual in our families when we reunite, when we can have celebrations together, when we can hold each other again, when we can give kisses and hugs to our distant family, when we go to a simcha that we would otherwise go to but couldn't have for the last year. It's a time for our community to create a ritual, to recognize our reentry, and it's a time for our world, Jewish and secular, to create something to realize the loss we've gone through, the challenges that we have endured, and the opportunity that is in front of us. Because it is through those rituals, whether dancing at a synagogue, unveiling a stone, naming a child, or naturalizing yourself as a citizen, and holding up that hand, that one becomes part of that process of realizing the sanctity of our history and the moment. May we find that ritual during this time, and may it allow us to appreciate the history we've gone through and the rebirth we've all been given. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Page 184, I invite you all to rise. The cantor leads us in the Chatzi Kaddish.